Alright, this is part 6 in FrankenTruckHD, and as I was showing you earlier, I had cut off parts of this core support assembly to make room for some things and making the hood clear, and in doing so I decided I went ahead and removed the condenser. I'm not a fan of AC. This truck didn't have AC. I really don't care. Some people may want to have it. I don't. And even if I did, I'd have to invest in a vintage air kit to make it work, because there's no way I'm going to be able to use the kit or what the components from the HD truck. So I'm working on placing the brakes and the steering column. But what I wanted to get done first was the gas pedal. Now what's cool about the HD trucks, or these later model trucks, is they have an electric gas pedal. And that is it. That's the whole assembly. You just plug it in, and this thing will, as you push down, it makes it go faster. Pretty interesting. And with that, it comes with this bracket. Now this was mounted directly to the firewall of the HD truck. And of course, the configuration for this truck is different, but I think it's going to adapt pretty quick. What I did is this leg on the bottom of this bracket was straight, and I made a couple little cuts and I pulled it back, and then there was a loop on here. There's just a bolt loop, and I cut that off, and let me just show you how that fits. I'm using a similar location, and I based it off of where the original pedal was. Now of course the travel on this pedal is a little bit different. The electric pedal kind of does this. So anyway, with that in place, this bracket, I've already marked it where I'm going to put it. I've got points of contact at the bottom, on the side, and on the other side. And I also flared out this angle here just a little bit. So I'm going to tack that in place, and that's going to take care of the gas pedal really quick. And once that's in place, I'll show you how that looks. Now the other things I'm going to have to figure out is getting the steering column in. Obviously I have an existing opening, but the steering column will not fit in this opening. The shifter mechanism fits right about here, and that's not going to work, obviously. So I'm going to have to cut this and figure out how to make the steering column match up. And then the other thing I'll have to deal with is making the brake pedal assembly work. The original bracket had 4 bolts that went outboard towards the front that held the pedal assembly and the clutch assembly. The HD truck had this thing, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to use that. It's just not quite what I need to line things up, and I'll figure that out as I go. And the HD also had studs pushing through the firewall. So there's a couple things I'll have to figure out and get in place, but I've seen it done to where somebody used this setup. They used the pedal assembly from the 67 to 72 truck and basically just put a little extension on, and everything worked fine. I'm going to use this existing hole here for the base part of the assembly. I may have to enlarge it a little bit to make it clear, this flange, this boss area. But no sense, I can't really move it down because there's inner structure there. So I'm just going to try to maintain where it's at, and we'll see how that works, and I'll show you that progression as I go along. Okay, gas pedal's in. Wasn't too hard. Got those welds in place, put some self-etch on it, and there you can see, nice and easy. Now, remembering that this thing does have an electric junction box right there, connector, I need to make room for the harness to fit as well. So the existing harness or fuse block mounted right here in this firewall, and on the HD truck it was a round opening. So I just made a cardboard template, traced it out, and that's going to be where the new HD wiring harness goes through. I'm still working on the brakes and the steering, but as I'm going along and figuring things out, I'm just trying to show you what the progress is. Well, I got the Hydroboost mounted. I used the bracket that came on the assembly, and the bolts go from aft through the firewall. I did cut out a little bit down here to clear the steering column opening, just in case I need it. I'm not sure exactly how much space I'm going to need yet, but there was one bolt here in space, and it wouldn't have done anything anyway, so I cut that off. I also got the hole trimmed out for the wire bundle, and just kind of fit that through to make sure that it would look right, and it does. So with that stuff mounted, I'm going to work on there's all that wire, work on getting the pedal assembly hooked up to operate the brakes, and of course along with that I'll be working on the steering column. Well, it's been a long day. I got distracted by a few things. I ended up selling that rusty Camaro, and the guy took some time to get that out of here. I actually did an oil change, and I had another friend stop by we just BS'd for a while, and he wanted to look at this truck, so I was showing him some things. As I showed you, I did get the Hydroboost in place, and I was trying to figure out how to make the clutch pedal work well, or the pedal assembly. Now the clutch that was on here, I cut that off. Some people may not like that, but I don't have much else to work with right now, and I'd have to find a shaft, and so it was just easier to just cut the pedal off. The other thing I did, I cut off two studs, these two bottom studs off of the original piece, and I made these holes match these holes up here on either side of the protrusion there, the fitting that's coming through. And by doing that, I'll have those two bolts here in those locations, and I'll have these two bolts back through the factory holes at the top of the firewall. The other thing that I had to do because of that bolt protrusion there was there's a little loop right here, there was a loop right here that this spring attached to, and the bolt would hit that. So I cut the loop off, and I'm just going to take this spring and I'm going to hook it back through that hole. I've already tried it, I know it'll work, and it'll take care of the brake return. So let me put that up in place, and I'll show you what it looks like. Sorry about the lighting, it is getting late, but there you can kind of see, hopefully, that is bolted in the original position. And what's really cool is here's the connection for the thrust rod or push rod in the old master cylinder setup, and here's the rod coming out of the Hydroboost, and they're almost in line with each other. And I will come up with a way to connect those two, and that'll remedy the brakes. I like it. At this point, the next thing will be, I'll have to cut up some of this stuff here to make the new column fit in. And as long as nothing interferes with this brake pedal and whatever else is going on, I should be good to go. But I'll find out. I may end up taking this all apart. But that's part of it. That's part of the fabrication process. Well, it's Friday. I just got off work a little bit ago, and of course I can't stop myself from doing some more. I had to remove the brake pedal, and not that it was that hard, just had a pin through the center. And the problem is, if you see these little marks I have, right there is one of them, and this is probably a mark where I'm going to end up cutting. The problem is when the steering column is up in place, it interacts badly, and the reason is it has this switch right here, and this switch also operates with the linkage, and I'm sure that's all pivotal to the function of the transmission, shifting, overdrive, whatever. So I can't relocate this. Plus the cable for the transmission comes through here, and it actually attaches back here on this pin. So this is all fixed, and I'm not going to mess with it. but when I put it up in place, the that switch hits the pedal. So rather than just cut off the pedal, I'm going to focus on getting the steering column up in place. It's pretty close actually. The radius on this part is very similar here on this opening. However, the bracketry is all different. You can see it's big and chunky, and this is just different. So I'm going to end up doing some custom cutting and fabricating and whatever, but I'll show you that as I get there. I did have a talk with a coworker today, and in that discussion I mentioned about this core support being a slight interference problem. He suggested something that I really hadn't thought of till he brought it up. You know, this core support, it'll sit a little more forward than where it's at right now, and there were some things it was hitting. Now I may not have to do this. I'm going to mock it up, put the fenders back on, get everything in place so it looks correct, and see what happens. But what he suggested was relocating the core support. And really, there's a couple ways that this could happen. I could cut these perches off, slide them back, and weld them back in place, or I could take the core support loose, burn out the hole, the mount hole, a little bigger aft, and then weld a new lip in the front, which might be the easier choice. And that way it positions the bushing further back in the mount. And there's room for that. I don't know if you can see that, but even if I just got an inch out of it, or 3/4 of an inch, I think that would probably be enough. That might be the easiest fix to the little bit of fitment issue with the core support. But again, I'll mock it up, get everything in place, and see how that works. But I'm really thinking that's a good idea, and it'll be easier than some of the other things that I've thought of. Anyway, I'm going to keep working on the steering column and see if I can't get that at least somewhat closer tonight. It's already going on 8 o'clock, but it's a nice day out, so I'll see what I can do. Well, I have a steering column, and after a lot of cutting and fitting and cutting and fitting, and I didn't want to bore you with all of that. Here I'm showing you. I ended up cutting a bunch of pieces out. I had to cut the main dash assembly so that I could clear the shifter linkage and switches and all that sort of thing. I tried to use the original piece that was on the column itself. This is part of it, pretty thick metal. That didn't work out, so I used some scrap that I had. Actually, that's some of the 1/8 inch plate that I had left over from the Camaro doing the mini tubs, and so I made one on either side, welded that on, and then back here I put a strap, and that was left over from my scroll project, and it just has a bolt in it so I can remove the steering column, but that is to stabilize the steering column because it could pivot without that, and as of now it's pretty solid. And the hard part really was figuring out where to place it, because combination of things, you know, without a seat in it, and trying to figure out, you know, how high it needed to be. I took some measurements from my buddy's truck. He has a 68 as well, and you know, it was really kind of tricky. But the advantage is this thing has a tilt column. Ta-da! So even at that, I'll have some adjustments I can make. And beyond that, I had to take well, I didn't have to. I thought I might have to shorten the column itself, but there's a slip joint right here, and this is at the bottom of its capacity. It's tight, but there's the bolt is in, and the U-joint clears the firewall. So I think for the most part the steering column is good, and I'm going to set the gauge cluster up in there and show you how that looks. Now this is just a test fit. All I wanted to do was make sure that the cluster and the column would interact fairly well. I may end up with a bit of a gap between the column and the plastic housing. And this is, again, just sitting there. There's nothing connected. But it does show that there's clearance available. And of course I'm going to merge the original dash bezel, which comes way out here. I'll merge these two together and make that work. Now that I've got the steering column in place, I can go back to tackling the brake pedal problem, because now I have an anchor. I can you know, really know where the column sits and work my way around that issue. So that's the next thing.